You know that like the Ethiopian church has like wizards.
Okay, on topic, by the way.
Yeah, there's like this. It's a kind of a like a deacon type of thing, but they're known special kind of deacons, but they're known to be like wizards. So they do wizard shit as well.
Fuck yeah.
And they are part of the church.
Fuck yeah. And they're also like the oldest part of the church.
Yeah.
Which is, just saying, Jesus was cool once. You could be a wizard.
Yeah.
Not anymore. So, welcome, guys, to The Empire Never Ended.
Hey.
Arc 5.
You!
First Arc 5 Patreon episode.
We said hey before you introduced us.
Yeah.
We made a mistake.
It's a new age.
Yeah, well, that's because today we're corporatists, and your names no longer matter.
Oh.
We are all just Tenopod. Yeah, we get no individualistic, modernistic, ego-stroking credit for doing what the natural order has demanded of us.
Okay.
You guys cool with that?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound cool, but I'll go along.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course you would think that.
Yeah.
So American corporatists, that's what we are.
Yeah, absolutely. We are American corporatists today here with The Empire Never Ended. And we're going to talk mostly today about...
Do you have the do every time you say
No, I don't, but I do have this. That's Duce.
So, I thought they were saying cocaine.
Cocaine.
Is that like Italian fascist or what?
Yeah. We're gonna. I wanted to set it up. This was my whole hope was to make it smooth like this. Today we're gonna talk about the. But now I only hear cocaine.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, that was the original. We already said that in the last episode. That was the other school of fascism. Do a bunch of coke and run around naked one.
Yeah, the alternative Italian fascism.
Yes, yeah, and this is where Mussolini took it. But we're talking about Americans today, specifically the hoity-toity super WASPs of the American ruling class in the interwar period and all their support for fascism. We're going to kind of do a little broad look at that particular chunk of America and focus on a couple of guys.
Are these people connected to Ezra Pound? Because they should be, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah. These are the circles. We're hitting those circles now, where he's not in this ebb, but he is in this world. Absolutely. So we're gonna look at the super fashy Time magazine, Time Incorporated, Time Life co-founder Henry Luce, and a guy named Richard Child, who was ambassador to Italy when Mussolini came to power.
Okay.
Cocaine.
I resisted wondering whether Richard Child is a pedophile.
Well, his name is Dick Child. And that was not lost on me in writing this.
Okay.
Yeah. It actually, when I wrote it, it slowly became hyphenated. It became Dick Child, and then eventually it became Dick Child, which is his superhero alter ego.
What was that one? Jesus.
No, I'm saving that one. All right. So, God, okay, we're on paper now. I'm on paper here. It's weird. Yeah, so we got Dick Child, Henry Luce, and a little bit about a guy named Thomas Lamont, J.P. Morgan banker. So we got every Tom, Dick, and Henry here.
Tom, Dick, and Henry. Tom, Dick, and Henry.
That's right.
Are Tom, Dick, and Henry like friends? Are they the same crew or are they different?
Oh, no.
groups?
This is like the crust, the crustiest of the upper crust.
Okay.
Yeah, these are guys with like family trees going back to like 1630 and shit. And these are the WASPs.
Skulls and bones.
Skulls and bones
Skulls
abound.
and bones.
Skulls and bones abound. Yeah, these are white folk. Like they're the first white folk. These are the original.
It's interesting then that there's so much into Italian.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So way back.
So if I'm not mistaken, this is kind of in some ways a continuation of the early ARC episode of ARC 3. No?
In a few ways. We
talked about Italian Americans, except this is focusing on the Americans.
Yes, it's a combination of our first 2 episodes of ARC 3, the Henry Ford episode and the Italian American episode. In this one, we have Henry Luce, the Lucy Goose.
Henry.
And Italian fascists. And way back in ARC 3, we took a little beat to talk about the idea of Americanism, which was a term that repeatedly popped up in our studies there in ARC 3. Many of the freaks in that ARC used the term themselves in their own writings and speeches, yada, yada. And we focused then on what we saw as 3, motifs that characterized Americanism. We called them God's people, the idea of chosen people, racial democracy, and warlord capitalism. So that's kind of that's sort of the last we spent a long time talking about it.
That's our spontaneous theory on
exactly.
American fascism.
Yeah. So we're going to keep spontaneizing that theory as we go now in this arc. So ARC 5, I think, picks that question up, and we're going to keep walking with it.
And this is the theory that we arrived at by reading crazy people.
And not even that many of them at that point, all right? Like we weren't even halfway through the arc, but it got us pretty far. And I think today we're going to be able to sort of return to that and ask more questions about
Americanism is really like a way to make fascism more American, right? I mean, it's like, because I guess for a lot of ordinary Americans of that time, fascism seemed like a foreign idea if you connect it to Mussolini, Hitler, and so on. And this was a way to say, actually, we have our own kind of that type of thing.
And I think it goes the other way too. Like, I think you have fascism developing from America to Italy, and from America, we know, to Germany. That one's more well known, I'd say. But we'll see in this that ruling class support for the beginnings of Mussolini's fascism were very much a part of the story of fascism as a whole. So I think the way I've been looking at it is that, maybe, I guess we've been talking about it like this too, is that Americanism is just like the missing piece of the usual idea of fascism, which is, or usually it's Nazism and Italian fascism. But Americanism is a massive missing piece of all of that. And probably without it, I don't know that scene would have looked the same, and it certainly wouldn't have lasted to today, I don't think.
Well, it's like Ezra Pound, I think he wrote some bad book and published it while he was in Italy.
The Jefferson Mussolini book?
Jefferson Mussolini.
Unreadable. I tried so hard.
Yeah. But that's kind of, you can see there what the point of that kind of type of thinking is. So you compare Jefferson and Mussolini, and obviously Jefferson is much older than Mussolini, so America had its own Mussolini even before Italy, is kind of the point. Or when, this is not America, this is our other focus, the Balkans, when Bishop Nikolai Velimirovic of the Serbian Orthodox Church compares Hitler to Saint Sava, for example.
Yeah. Right. We're going to get another one today too, and maybe one that fits a little bit better, and that is Theodore Roosevelt now is the original fascist. Well, according to the Americanists anyway, one of them, who we'll talk about today. But so the original idea of this episode was to draw just kind of a big broad brush over the WASP kind of ruling class interests in the interwar period in fascism, just kind of focusing on Mussolini's popularity and celebrity in that class. And I am going to do a lot of that at the beginning of the episode. But I also got, as it happens on this show, super sidetracked by this guy, Henry Luce, and his world. And he kept ticking little box after box after box for our podcast. So he's one of those, I've been calling them in my head scratch and sniff Nazis. When you start scratching a little bit, a new odor kind of wafts out, and there's just so much there. Every part of him has its own special tenopod stank on it, So Henry Luce is really a gift that keeps on giving. But I also like that his name was Henry, because Henry Ford, there's a biblical recurrence patterning here.
It
rhymes, as St. Lucas said, George Lucas said. Anyway, I guess also the Henry Ford one, we had Henry being more close to German fascism. And in this one, Henry Luce is going to be all in on Mussolini's fascism. So this episode's going to kind of open up the topic of corporatism for us, maybe, but don't expect like it to be about that. I just think now we kind of have to deal with its history a little bit more, or at least I do, moving forward.
Sure.
Do we need to clarify something? I seems to me that a lot of people these days confuse like capitalist corporations and the role of capitalist corporations.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to go, Fritz, is corporatism the same as corporations?
Okay, corporatism is actually a very interesting topic, and I am really wanting to do a full treatment on it in the future. But it is it's an idea that I guess arguably stems out of the Catholic Church, out of an encyclical of one of the fucking Leos who coined the term corporatism, and the idea was that everything acts within the one body, the corpus, right?
Like Corpus Christi.
Like Corpus Christi. And this idea, found different iterations, and one of them was Italian fascism. And then there is also something called American corporatism that I'm just not really ready to comment on, but I would love to do that soon. But in short, that idea has a lot to do with the kind of tripartite system of labor, capital, and the state, and that relationship. So the kind of typical representative tripartite union system is called by a lot of people American corporatism. But again, I'm not quite there yet, even though it is an interesting part of this story, because there will be a lot of arguments from these guys. And some of them are actually, kind of credible that America is a kind of corporatist state anyway.
Yeah. I mean, the way that like Yugoslav Serbian fascists describe this idea, they call it the organic kind of idea.
Sure.
And that meant that, the nation is a body and then you have different parts of it.
Exactly.
So what Italians call corporations, I think the Yugoslav called something like, I think you would probably translate that to English something as like estate or something like that.
Sure.
So like different areas of industry would be organized in separate like organs of the body of the nation,
Yeah.
So it's like a kind of, they would see a natural way. Of course, it doesn't make any sense. It's natural in any way.
Yes.
But also according to that, ideology, something like a political party would be a parasite.
Right.
It's like some parasite on the body of the nation.
Right.
The Jews, of course, as well, bankers and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, like as you can tell by the use of the words estates and all that, there's a lot of nostalgia for the Middle Ages and feudal relationships built into all this. So the main star of today's show, Henry Luce, gave fascist corporatism a huge platform in the U.S. in the pages of some of the most important magazines of the era, like Time and Life and Fortune, because he owned these magazines. He also started Sports Illustrated. These, like, collectively, these are some of the most important, like, cultural, I hesitate to call them literature, but something like that, media, culturally important media of the 20th century, really. Like,
basically until early 21st century internet stuff replaced.
Or cable news or something. You know?
But even during the cable news era, things like Time and the like Sports Illustrated were still important.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Publications.
And it's Sports Illustrated is just so obviously a fascist paper now that I read that like I'm kicking it was, the idea of it was very clearly inspired by exactly the fascist ideas around fitness and sport and why they had this. Like Henry Luce was fully engaged in that conversation. And Sports Illustrated was his attempt to do that for the States, like was his attempt to adopt.
It's a very 20th century thing in general,
very much
because everybody was obsessed with physical fitness and the beautiful body.
But I think that, doesn't come out of nowhere either,
Right.
And it's being amplified by these publications that have many constant, uncountable millions of readers, really, if you count the world as a whole, But before we get into that, Henry, I want to return to the period a little bit, just for a second, just to mention it, what that Boris opened up for us back in his Italian American fascism episode. So Boris had mentioned that the press loved Mussolini, importantly, which is very much what we're talking about today. But that episode was very much about Italian shit. Yeah, like that was their cosa. That was all of them. That was like fucking anti-fascist, taking out fascists.
Well, because this is, whatever. This is when you kind of huge numbers of Italians in America,
Yes.
fresh off the boat,
Yeah.
and already some that were a generation or two in that were getting into fascism, and you had big, fascist camps and meetings at Sons of Italy halls all over the U.S. and
Yes.
all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We also had guys like on the sort of more upper class side of that, like General Pope. I think we talked about him. Pope. They called him Pope. He was a super sketchy publisher that started the National Enquirer, which National Enquirer, by the way, for those of us who grew up like in my generation, is like an ever-present thing. Whenever you go to the grocery store with your mom, it was there. It was Bat Boy was on the front of it. It was always the juiciest stories. But it literally started as a fascist propaganda outlet. And it was so important that British intelligence identified it as like an enemy institution. That it's like...
and Pope owned all the biggest Italian American newspapers too that had kind of national circulation.
Yeah, he was a big deal. Yeah.
Il Progresso and kind of other ones.
But like despite guys like Pope, Italians were still not really white yet. And this is right on the heels of things like, there were anti-Italian pogroms in the South and shit like that. Anti-Italian sentiment was still pretty high. But Mussolini, the very Italian dude, was somehow beloved by these WASPs there in the States. Beloved by the wispiest WASPs in the world, people that joined things like the Puritan Society for Anglo-American Friendship, stuff like that, like those motherfuckers, the three names. It's those guys that get us into the gross guts, I think, of Americanism.
Is a part of it like that both groups were very fascinated by like ancient Rome and things like this?
There's a little bit of that. There's like, I'd say there's like, Rome never stopped being like a tourist destination. It was, like these people did go, they did marvel, yada, yada.
My understanding of it, and it's been a while since I did that episode, but that a lot of their fascination from it came from this, they had the same common desire to figure out what was happening with all these unruly working masses in their countries. And look, the Italians, they figured something out. They figured out a way of both regulating this chaos that's going on with unions and strikes and also maintaining the traditional power and authority of their ruling classes. And I think they like that.
Yeah.
For them, I think it was also, they approached in a kind of racist way, which is like, okay, we don't like all this totalitarian nonsense. That's for the Italians to get them because they're, crazy and unruly Southerners. Like, we don't need that aspect of it, but we can learn from them. And they also kind of liked it because, well, they had a lot of Italians and a lot of people they thought were unruly. And so they, I think, didn't shy away from maybe taking a kind of more waspy approach to a heavy hand on some of those people.
Yeah, it was a common opinion at the time that Italian fascism had seduced an enormous chunk of the labor movement, specifically Catholics and specifically Italian Catholics. But I don't know. I think whether or not, that's true, I don't know. I feel like when we did Arc 4, there's a more complicated story behind that kind of narrative, but maybe.
Yeah, I think it was a mix.
Yeah.
It really depended on, there were Italian American working class people who supported fascism and ones that didn't.
Yeah, of course. And and I don't think it's just like,
it was more of, I think, an active battle at this time than it was in other ethnic communities.
Yeah.
Like, if we're comparing it to Arc 4, like the, South Slavic migrants were way more pro-labor in general, and they didn't have as many of, battles with fascists at the time that happened later. With the Italian Americans, it was ongoing from, the 30s on.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also a much larger community, right? It's huge, millions.
This is why I've got kind of a problem with the way that a lot of historians deal with this moment, which is just to say like, hey, there was a prejudice against Italian Americans, hence fascism. The argument being literally, I don't get no respect.
Yeah.
Like that's the sum of the usual case here. Yeah.
But General Pope's an interesting character then, because he is, he does have a little bit of that, I don't get that respect, but he was a millionaire owner of like a cement corporation, a cement conglomerate.
Nothing to see here. The fascist mobbed up corporatist fucking running a cement company in the fucking 20s.
A shit ton of like media, and reportedly had like, ears in the White House, people that would listen to him in the government.
Yeah. No, he wielded a club there. But part one is not about that motherfucker. Mm-hmm. Part one of this is about those motherfuckers. The WASPs, the three names.
Okay, I was going to say the Italians?
No, those motherfuckers. White folk. So maybe the best, one of the sources that I really liked for this episode about the U.S.'s response to the Italian corporate state is a book by a historian named John Diggins that was called Mussolini and Fascism, The View from America, published in 1972. And in it, Diggins gives a pretty horrifying view of exactly how broadly appealing Mussolini and fascism were to many facets of American society, including even, as I kind of hinted at, problematic sections of the labor movement, but I'm not talking about the rank and file, but in the leadership. So like Samuel Gompers, for instance, gave the AFL a fun pro-fascist twist until his immediate successor went hard Antifa. And but like for a moment, the AFL officially had some kind of I don't know, a fascist leaning openly. Although it's not really clear if Sam really understood what he was talking about either.
I think last time we talked about this, we also mentioned the American Legion as being.
I think that needs to be an early episode.
Okay,
because they do pop up a lot in this story, but not in this episode.
They were directly inspired by Italian fascism.
Yeah. No, they were fucked up. Yeah, they offed a bunch of IWW guys back in the day and stuff. So, anyway, so basically the entire U.S. capitalist press loved Mussolini. And Mussolini was second only to Hitler in their mind at this time. And Citizen Kane himself, William Randolph Hearst, I call him Randy, owner of the largest media conglomerate of the period, who he even put out films through MGM and stuff like that. He was writing Adolf and Benito's little fasci even when it stopped being cool. So, and of course, it wasn't just the press magnates. This guy, Thomas Lamont, he's our Tom from our Tom, Dick, and Henry. Thomas Lamont was the WASP running JP Morgan Bank at the time, and he worked closely with JP Morgan's press coordinator, a guy named Martin Egan, to straight up lead fascist propaganda dumps on the American people. And like, these aren't like, there's no point in hiding it. You don't have to be fancy at this point, right? You just say fascism is awesome, you just say it. And there's a lot of this going on out of these circles. And in fact, Lamont himself personally, essentially bailed out the entire country of Italy from its debts, to the U.S. from his own pocket, because there was a lot of discussion about how we can't really call Italy a safe investment for U.S. capital or U.S. power. It owes too much money. They figured out how much Italy owed, and fucking Lamont just like wrote them a fucking check and got the whole state kickstarted for Mussolini there. So Lamont's dealings with the fascists ran through the managing editor of Collier's magazine, who was some guy named Edgar Sisson, who is likely the source of the conspiracy theory that Lenin was a secret agent of German intelligence. This guy was a big promoter of the story, maybe started it. Lamont also somehow acted as a treasurer to the Italian American Society, which was something that Boris did mention in Arc 3.
Yeah.
This was different than the Italian Brotherhood, although these guys also had ties to them, but this was more of a broad, I think, coalition. But like a guy named fucking Thomas Lamont was the president of it. So it says something. So in 1923, with dewy tears of admiration in their eyes, 1,000 Patrick Batemans gathered together for the Second Congress of the International Chamber of Commerce in Rome. The largest delegation of these high-powered, speed-snorting, amped-up leaders of tomorrow were, of course, the Americans, who numbered about 200 delegates. And cheering on this new little Napoleon with, reportedly, a notably weak handshake, something I learned about Mussolini.
Oh.
His supporters were like, it's weird that his handshake is so weak and limp-wristed. Just a fun detail, you know? These are people who loved him. They have no reason to lie about this.
Great guy, but weak handshake. Come on.
Exactly. Yes. So cheering on this weak handshaking Napoleon were guys like Julius Barnes, president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce at the time, Lewis Pearson, board chairman of the Irving National Bank in New York. There were representatives of the Congress of the American Bankers Association, Alba B. Johnson, who was the president of the Railway Business Association, and a guy named Willis Booth, vice president of the Guarantee Trust Company, who, like days after this meeting, would become president of the International Chamber of Commerce as a whole. And all that comes from this guy Diggins. So when they got back stateside, Chamber of Commerce president at the time, Julius Barnes, announced that this was a new era in Italy. And his soon-to-be successor, Booth, said that Benny Boy, Mussolini had brought the Italians into the realm of promise. And at a convention of the National Association of Manufacturers, this aging NAM council guy named James Emery spoke to this like snorting, barking litter of capitalist pig dogs, saying,
"The spectacle of a radical socialist, an extreme leader, not only converted by the lightning stroke of intelligence and falling from his error like Saul of Tarsus from his horse, but leading through the streets of a reunited country a great body of citizens who saved the nation from the blighting hand of radical socialism."
And he's smart because he talked about Saul of Tarsus.
Well, it's biblical. It's a lot of religious language around these guys surrounding Mussolini. So if people are disturbed by the thought of like ultra rich and powerful sociopaths giving messianic praise and worship to Benito Mussolini, this isn't your podcast. So you had your religious stuff, but you also had your fair share of that kind of classic, like, Benny shows what a hard-working man can do kind of thing, thrift and hard work. Like that was a really big part of their approach. Of course, much like Ron DeSantis and Disney, American capital would eventually turn on Mussolini and Hitler for getting a bit too creative about their own capitalists. But in the years preceding and following the Great Depression, Mussolini was kiff. He was it. He was the cat's meow, baby.
The bee's knees.
They were ready to flip the rattler with this butter and egg man straight to Fashylvania. They loved him. Butter and egg man.
But yeah, what was it? What was another? We're just looking at that list of 1926.
We can't keep. The thing is like when you read them, they pass through your body like a.
Boy, that's really eggs in your coffee. And that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Right?
Yeah, it's like easy. It's eggs in your coffee.
Was that it? Are you sure?
It was.
Well, there's duck soup. Duck soup is like an easy. Yeah.
Pretty sure it was eggs in coffee.
Fascism in America was duck soup. They were all dipping their bills. What's the horse one again? God damn it!
A racehorse is a oh God, what is it? It was a good one. Bangtail.
A bangtail. Mussolini was that bangtail.
Put a couple C's on the bangtail.
Yeah.
Before I go dip my bill with some dollies.
There we go. All right, we're in it now. We're trained.
We're in it. Yeah.
Ready to go. So this love affair with Mussolini went pretty late into the 30s for some, and it was even okay to work Mussolini into a hit song for, this is a British musical called Anything Goes, quite famous one. It's identified as Cole Porter's song, though there are some indications that the Mussolini line that I'm going to show you actually came from this writer named Wodehouse, who...
Oh, P.G. Wodehouse?
You do know him. Okay.
Of course I know P.G. Wodehouse.
So I didn't know that he wrote an epic, book, and he spent his lifetime trolling Oswald Mosley. Did you know this?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I didn't know this. This is so good. So he called him Spode. Oswald Mosley's name was Spode, and he made a book about the black shorts. It was Spode.
P.G. Wodehouse is where Jeeves comes from.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's a
Jeeves
theory there's like, so I'm going to play you the song in a second. There's a couple seconds from it, but there's this theory that P.G. Wodehouse might have slipped this lyric in to the British version specifically as a kind of a weird, inscrutably subtle British joke against Oswald Mosley.
Okay.
But nonetheless, the line is here, but I just wanted to play it for you. So I'm just gonna play it, and then I'm gonna read the lyrics because
okay.
Because I'd like to know what you think they say in this.
You're the top. You're addressed by Patu.
You're the top. You're an Epstein's tattoo. You're the nimble trade of the feet of Fred Astaire. You're Mussolini.
You're Mrs. your camembert.
So that's the song part. Any idea what they might have said?
Did she say you're an Epstein statue?
Bravo!
Yeah.
That's the hardest one. I'm so impressed that you got that.
Okay.
Yeah, she calls it. She says Epstein statue.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's you're the top. You're addressed by Patu. You're the top. You're an Epstein statue. You're the nimble tread of the feet of Fred Astaire. You're Mussolini. You're Mrs. Sweeney. You're Camembert, I think is the last.
Yeah,
one
it
there.
is.
Very
Good
nice.
job, Epstein statue. Yeah. Epstein statue.
You just heard Epstein. And he
I just zoomed in on it. So the song's a little bit off topic, a couple of reasons, but it's just, it's fun. There's a jaunty lyric about Mussolini in it. So we're still floating around in the 1920s in the narrative, so let's stay there for a little bit more. The year after that big 1923 businessman circle jerk in Rome, the socialist politician Giacomo Matteotti called out the fashion parliament for things like election rigging and violence, and he gets offed the next day. So the American petroleum firm, the Sinclair Exploration Company, had just made some very shady deals with the upstart fascists about a week prior, in which Mussolini conceded a 50-year monopoly on oil exploration to this American firm, Sinclair, causing which was connected to the uproar in Parliament that got Matteotti killed, right? So the U.S. State Department was a bit worried about this, and this is what Diggins says in his book. Immediately, the State Department instructed the embassy in Rome to, quote, investigate and report on the rumor that Matteotti was abducted in order to prevent revelations of an oil scandal involving the Sinclair concession. So you had a lot of capital interest from the very beginning, as you can see, a lot of money flowing in. The investments as a whole weren't like unusual as far as U.S. Investments in other countries in Europe, but it was sort of unusually propagandized for in a way that you didn't see in other countries. So for instance, like there was a lot of experts, rich people, businessmen, lobby groups really forming, promoting a very inflated idea about Italy's economic prospects, and then literally, like I said before, paying off their debts in order to open the markets to American businesses and stuff. But like the U.S. political establishment wasn't yet totally sold. Exactly. Like some pieces of it definitely were, but like there was like the kind of randomness of some of the violence was giving people pause and concern. Like maybe it's not as stable as we think it is. But any initial nervousness, though, wore off by around 1929, and then you get something like $66 million flowing in from the USA in that year to build fascism's modern commercial infrastructure. And the US easily surpassed England and Germany to become Italy's most important trading partner. So Diggins specifies that Italy in this time was the US's sixth most important trading partner. But this includes, just so you get a sense of like who the US loved at this point. As I recall, it went something like the UK and then Germany and then a few others and then Italy. But I got that from like a Noam Chomsky talk a long time ago. So you might want to look that up. That's 2 Epstein references in one show. Right there.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So anyway, some of the companies that Diggins
Wait, Chomsky
mentions,
didn't go to the island, right? He just said he had Epstein do his taxes or some shit.
he's cagey about
he
it.
had meetings with Barack.
Ehud Barak. Yeah.
Like facilitated by Epstein. They were like talking about Israel, Palestine, weird stuff.
That's fucking weird.
That is weird.
Fucking Chomsky.
Yeah.
And Chomsky was like super pissed off and arrogant when they asked him about
Very. Yeah. Like,
he
what's the
immediately
problem?
got angry. Like,
Yeah. It was a weird response.
Yeah.
It was really weird.
he's
But
a weird
angry
guy.
in his way, where he's like, it means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, he's just like,
You get an F.
yeah.
So some of the companies.
Gaslighting.
We could say on this too. You wanna,
No,
no,
please
Right?
move on.
no? Okay.
I want to come back to Wodehouse eventually because there was some weird shit there.
Is there, because he seems curious. Is he kind of one of these?
I haven't read about Wodehouse in a long time,
Okay.
but he did have some weird, because he was in Germany when World War II started. And then there was, he did some stuff. He may have made some broadcasts and that was controversial.
Oh, no. Yeah. Okay. But his defenders say that he made those broadcasts under duress and that he used them to sneak in like jabs at the, right? At the
But there was some other weird stuff. And then I think he never went back to England afterwards. He went to move to America.
England does suck though.
Yeah.
So In like
I mean, if
1940.
you've read Woderouse's characters, you can kind of see how he could just be like one of these like dumb rich British guys. That's the characters that he writes.
I would like to read his Black Shorts book, but it's actually pretty long for a satire jab at Oswald Mosley, but maybe it's good. I don't know. Anyway, it's a fun time. Interesting characters abound. Also, it's easy to forget too that like kind of all these people were making some of the first versions of this media. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like this was a voice in the wilderness. This was the voice that like everyone heard, you know, It's easy to forget some of that, how important like a new media was for some of this period. So some of the companies that Diggins mentions being deeply invested in fascist Italy in 29 include Otis Elevator, Allied Machinery, National Cash Register, which my granddad worked for. He went to bars fixing cash registers, and he used to bring a gun because he was racist and drunk.
Also, Angleton's dad worked for.
Also, Angleton's dad worked for NCR. Yeah. And of course, fucking Ford. Of course, you know, not going to be out of that. No surprise there. So a publicist of the time reported that they were
Angleton's dad worked for NCR in Rome.
There we go.
So,
damn.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. So a publicist of the time reported that they were all, quote, sharing in the business revival under the thoroughly level-headed Premier Mussolini. And there was a bit of a spectrum here, though. Not a wide
Thoroughly
one.
level-headed?
Thoroughly level-headed. He's a stable genius. On one end, you had guys like, there's a spectrum, a little spectrum. It's tight, but it's there. On one end, you had guys like Otto Kahn, who was an investment banker and partner for Kuhn Loeb and Company, which financed the U.S. rail system and stuff like that. So Otto Kahn said,
it's entirely possible for a man to cherish freedom, to adhere to progressive political and social tendencies with liberal conceptions as I do, and look upon fascism or anything resembling it as utterly unthinkable and intolerable in the United States, as of course I do, yet admire Mussolini.
See, it's good for them over there.
yes, exactly. So that's like the liberal end.
If only we could make our own kind of fascism. That's
the other end. So so that's basically like what you would call the ultra critical end of the business world's reaction to Mussolini, and most of these fuckers will pass through that position on their way out of their love affair with Mussolini at some point. But when they do that, when like the real fascists pass through there, then it really starts feeling like racial democracy stuff, you know, like real hard. So that whole thing we said, yeah, dictatorship's fine for the Italians, but WASPs are naturally democratic, that kind of thing. But okay, that's like the critical end. The other end, the non-critical end, can be the objective end, can be summed up in the words of Julius A. Bash, remembered at the time as a, quote, leading spokesman for Wall Street. That's how he was introduced in this article in the 1920s, who said, Mussolini is a man every country needs. Autocracy is the only solution to the world's problems. That is, if we could only be sure that every autocrat would be a good autocrat. And that's
the problem.
That's so that's much more the line of thought that most of these guys were having then, especially our boy Luce a little bit later. Though he does take both of these positions in various ways at different times, but most of these guys did. So Wall Street in particular enjoyed chortling Benny's sweaty Corleone in a really embarrassing display, like this little gem here from the Wall Street Journal. And if you don't mind, it's a poem.
Okay.
On formula and etiquette, he seems a trifle shy, but when it comes to go and get, he's some two-fisted guy. On constitutional technique and precedence, he's lame. On grace and glamour, rather weak. Such lacks don't cramp his game. Instead, they're assets for his job. Rough, rude, plain word and act. To mold a nation through a mob. To make a dream a fact. Red nonsense had its mischief proved, his black shirts curbed and quelled, perhaps in ways not graced or grooved, how the reins beheld. A blacksmith's son to purple Rome, a brusque command he brought. Italia, cleansed, returned home, but more than her he's taught. Word froth and demagogues and drones, banned, sweat and service praised, desks manned when AM intones, languorous Italy dazed. History maybe holds a chance of more for blacksmith's son, if he, twixt Germany and France, sees justice kindly done. Whatever the outcome, write his name, that history may not shirk. A new Columbus with his fame, new world of will and work.
Damn.
Hopefully, whoever wrote that was one of the guys who auto-defenestrated himself when the stock market crashed a couple years later, but we will never know. Yeah. But the Wall Street Journal.
I'm sorry, I liked your reading of that too.
Change a little bit. Find it.
It ends with a new world of will and work.
A new world of will and work.
Okay, sorry. That reminds me of the what's his name, Bambucci or something like that. He was an Italian communist who then became a fascist. But he was like one of the leaders of the Communist Party, and would like have photos of him with Lenin and so on. And then he was the guy who was like at the end lynched with Mussolini. He's one of the guys hanging next to him, upside down. And he and he said something how for a time he was, later on, like during the war, he became very anti-communist and anti-Bolshevik. But for a time when he was kind of like Mussolini, praising Lenin and Mussolini at the same time. And he was saying how, the Russians had the Bolshevik Revolution, we have a fascist revolution, and they have one thing in common. It's like the triumph of work.
Yeah, people are going to be saying that about Roosevelt here pretty soon in history. Yeah. When the 30s roll in. Very interesting. Yeah.
Also very lame.
Also stupid. Yeah, yes. I was thinking about, what's the last guy you covered in the Kali Yuga reading room? I can't think of his name. Freda. I was thinking about Freda a lot, actually, reading this. Freda, and it's so dumb. It just makes Freda seem extra dumb because he comes so late to this discussion. Yeah. But like this discussion is being had by like guys like Luce in the Wall Street Journal in the 20s.
So this poem was published in the Wall Street.
This is a Wall Street Journal poem.
This wasn't published in like
no.
I don't know, some minor newspaper.
No.
When it comes to go and get, he's some two-fisted guy.
So I want to get to Child and Luce soon, but I'm going to wrap this section up and give us a little glimpse into some of the love Benny got from the U.S. government and its representatives too. Now, there's a lot to be said about corporatism and its influence on the U.S. and vice versa, but we're just going to kind of like crack that a little bit today. But in general, there were and are some seemingly serious studies that draw parallels between like FDR's administration and Mussolini's state. I don't know much about that. I can't speak to its credibility yet. I'm open to it, but I want to read about it. But for now, I'm more interested in like the less thoughtful claims to that effect, the more loosey-goosey ones by like career WASPs, basically, who just really loved fascism on a very deep level. And for that, we will turn briefly to U.S. Ambassador in Rome at the time of Mussolini's march on Rome, Richard Washburn Child, and his fucked up little diary. All right. Part 2, Rise of Dick Child. Here we go. So, as his name might imply, Richard Washburn Child is one of those old whites. His American line starts in 1630 in Massachusetts, and his dad was a shoe manufacturer. So I was thinking about putting a little bit in here about the Puritan Society that I mentioned earlier, but I think that's going to have to wait. There's a lot of like weirdo conspiracy shit surrounding the Puritan Society for Anglo-American friendship, but that's because it's full of like CIA agents and stuff. So anyway.
When you say the Puritan Society, I immediately think like some serial killers or something like that. Yeah.
But like
a cult.
Dick Child is like literally religiously a Puritan. You know what I mean? Like that's his background.
Nice.
I know for a fact he wasn't Catholic because he converted on his deathbed, which is also a bad sign for later, but there's a reason for that. But Child learned at Harvard because he was... Child studied law at Harvard because he was one of those motherfuckers, And during World War I, he ended up working as a propagandist for the Treasury Department. In 1921, was sent off to Rome to act as Warren G. Harding's ambassador. And for those of you who don't remember, Harding, because I sure as fuck didn't, he was mostly famous for this gigantic hustle he had where he illegally leased Navy oil reserves to private companies under the table and took a big cut. He died in 1923 just before that shit came out. And the last Harding knew about the world before he shuffled off to the fifth dimension, he was one of the most popular WASPs in the whole universe. Like everybody loved him. Child is riding that wave into Rome.
Is it the fifth or the fourth dimension?
Well, Harding went to the 5th for sure, because that's where, like, so there's those different levels of mentor spirits. It depends on your, I mean, is this Group 69 or is this William Pelly? That's the...
Yeah.
I was thinking more Pelly, because it's around his time. So Child gets to Italy around the same time that Sacco and Vanzetti get arrested back in the U.S. And Child writes about this. Richard Washburn Child.
I used to get dozens of letters a day threatening to make me the eye for an eye or the tooth for a tooth. These black-hand letters promised kidnapping my little girl and my wife, bombs, stilettos, and sulfuric acid for me. My military attaché begged me to enter the embassy offices by the back door, not to walk alone, to have my chauffeur take off his livery, and otherwise conceal or protect myself. Of course, I refused.
The chauffeur shall don his livery, or we shall all be damned, sir.
when you're taking a man's chauffeur's livery away, I mean, times are tough with the commies there, you know?
Yeah.
They're out of control, clearly. So Child learned in Italy that multi-party democracy leads to nothing more than, quote, blackmail by self-organized interest groups who could hold the state hostage for any offense. And because of this, the Reds were running wild in Italy. But luckily, a hero arose.
I discovered one morning that all the manservants in my house had joined the fascisti. It was hope. And all the time, Mussolini was rising to the surface.
This is from his
Yeah.
memoirs, by the way. It's called something like America, the View from Europe or something like this. I think that was his. Was it
Yeah,
his or
yeah, I think
Claire
so.
Luce's?
I think I remember that.
Okay. So Child was a bit of a blowhard, you have to say. So take this next bit, I guess, with a grain of salt maybe. But Child, at least according to U.S. President Coolidge, took credit for Mussolini's march on Rome. Child brags a lot that he gave Benny the idea when he was U.S. ambassador there. So again, Richard Washburn Child, Dick Child, does a lot of self-mythologizing. It's true. But the fact is that after his time in the embassy was up, Dickie returned to the States and starts propagandizing really hard for Mussolini through things like Randolph Hearst's outlets, you know, and with money from J.P. Morgan through Thomas Lamont, and makes like a full court press, they say, in the slang. So he also claims, and historians seem to support this, that Dick Child co-authored Mussolini's autobiography. The one thing we know for sure is that he translated it, and he published it chapter by chapter from 1928 in the Saturday Evening Post, bit by bit. When he was, this is after his ambassadorship was over. Child was definitely one of those guys that believed that fascism was translatable also into the American social context, and you get a hint of this in his memoirs. Richard Washburn Child.
I had learned that it's impossible to understand Italian fascismo, as distinguished from the imitations in other lands, without understanding that it is more than a political party. It is made of stuff which has nothing in common with the self-seeking of class struggles. Fascismo is a philosophy and an emotion running counter to the recent stream of thought which centers mankind's attention on rights. Mussolini, without distinguishing between classes, is the first conspicuous leader since Roosevelt that has organized political unity, not around rights, but around duties.
It's Theodore Roosevelt he's talking about there. That's when we get Theodore now as like the original American fascist. So there's a quick grab here for that equivalent image that we talked about earlier in American history. And so, of course, our boy settles on Theodore Roosevelt, who is fun because of, he was the president when people used to get massacred inside extinct volcanoes. What's not to love about a guy like that, you know? He was a dude that was pretty cool with the word imperialism, which was uncommon for American presidents.
I guess also his kind of public image has similarities with Mussolini, no?
Mm-hmm. You
like
mean
the whole Rough Rider thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a Mussolini equivalent to the teddy bear? I guess, I hope it's not pizza. That would bum me out. We will never do an episode on the fascist origins of pizza. I don't want to know. What?
No, I think it's American.
Thank you.
Origin.
Yeah. Italian American.
Yes.
Oh. What? All right.
Gaetano Bresci invented the pizza.
There we go. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Huh. Nice. Good reference. So Gaetano Bresci, Paterson, New Jersey, weaver, organizer, got all his money, went to Italy, shot to death King Umberto I, and it was sweet.
Yep.
Yeah. So Child asks, I have to say his name every time or I'm not going to do it.
Richard Washburn Child. Washburn Child.
What is this liberalism? Does it mean universal indulgence? Does it mean legislative bodies in continuous session so that they may afford the indecorous spectacles which have sickened everyone? Does it mean that in the name of liberty, the few are to have the freedom to kill the liberty of all the rest? If this is liberalism, it is the theory and practice of humiliation and ruin. For youth, restless and eager, presenting itself with the dawn of a new history, there are other words which move even more deeply than liberty. These words are order, organization, service. I will state principles which were Theodore Roosevelt's and which were mine, and which I believe were American long before the word fascisti was in existence. These are the principles which fascisti can approve, and it is not a diplomat approving of fascisti ideas, but a diplomat stating ideas which fascisti can commend.
Oh,
America.
Once
More
again,
fascism
he's
than
denying
fascists.
agency to Italian fascists.
Yes. Yeah. He might be too, but I mean, like, he might have loved it so much, he was just like, I guess we invented it.
Yeah.
Cool.
I love how he's saying the fascisti all the time.
Yeah. And
You know?
fascismo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, stating that he's an expert.
And then he speaks Italian. I
Yeah.
think that was important. Mussolini loved his waspy ass and supposedly included pieces of his conversations with Dick Child into his own speeches. And a fun little peek into one of those conversations. Now, keep in mind, this is not Mussolini talking. This is the ambassador of Rome speaking, the U.S. ambassador to Rome speaking to Mussolini. And this is what he says.
When one makes the fasces, the first requirement is to find the individual rods, straight, strong, and wiry, such as you have found, Mr. President, and so skillfully bound together with the strength of unity. But if they had been rotten sticks, you could not have made the fasces. Unity in action would have been impossible. The rotten sticks would have fallen to pieces in your fingers.
Now, maybe it's hard to tell without context there, but that's them having a fun chat about purges. Yeah. So who are these rotten sticks in the American context? So luckily, Child met a top-notch Italian fascist physio-anthropological biologist who had some thoughts about that. So Child recounts a conversation he had with this Italian biologist.
Our increasing knowledge of such interbreeding shows that in many cases of different races, the half-breed starts a progeny which becomes sterile, or is susceptible to tuberculosis, or to decay of the nervous stamina, to the production of unfit beings.
Perhaps this powerful interest for race and nation has a scientific reason. In many cases, it is useless to argue by wish. It is only possible to argue by fact.
I see what you mean then about
fucking
this
feelings.
kind of going into the racial democracy thing.
He's getting there.
Very quickly.
He's getting there. Yeah. So, despite the wave of propaganda from all corners of the American ruling class, Mussolini finally went a little too far, maybe for some, with the announcement of the corporate state, for some capitalists. And a precious few started wondering if Mussolini was really the staunch defender of private property and the free flow of capital that Child, America's foremost Mussolini expert at this point and apologist, had convinced them that he was. So most of the ruling class stayed on the fascist train up to like 1934. A few took it further than that too. But most of them just kind of flipped to saying like all dictatorships are bad. That's the old, how we do. So only 2 years before that, Fortune magazine was arguing that the quote corporate state is to Mussolini what the New Deal is to Roosevelt. And this wasn't just a flippant statement. They had mainstream economists arguing that Roosevelt's governmental philosophy relative to business followed the same map as fascism followed in Italy or Nazism followed in Germany. The only difference, they argued, is that the U.S. retained its democratic institutions.
Yeah.
Okay, so he moves to Italy, becomes a propaganda writer for Mussolini. I guess gets bored at some point, moves back to New York, dies in 35. Yeah. 35 is a perfect time for him to die because he was spared, I guess, the full rejection of fascism by the business community and the political establishment. Like after 35, they would all become suddenly anti-fascist, So this is how Diggins sets up this these kind of three moments of American business's relationship to American fascism, to Italian fascism. So he says, up to 1935, business opinion of fascism might be characterized as falling roughly into a few chronological patterns. At first, before the March on Rome, a mood of uncertainty marked by a suspicion of fascist violence and lawlessness. Then after the takeover, a shift from cautious optimism to outright enthusiasm as the regime showed its what he says anti-radical colors, meaning like anti-socialist colors. With the announcement of corporatism in 1926, mild skepticism about the potential of state intervention. And then during the early Depression years, a brief but positive reassessment of Italy's centralized economy. And then finally, after 1934, a clamorous repudiation of the whole fascist experiment. So that's great as far as the normies went. But Tenepod is not about the normies, typically. No. Or about the freaks, especially those freaks when they run some of the most important publications in cultural history in the U.S. You know,
also like we discovered that the normies are often freaks.
Freaks, that's true. Yeah,
like people would think of Ezra Pound as like some kind of a normie, I guess.
That's a stretch.
You don't think so? I mean, as far as fascists go.
Oh, sure. Yeah. He respectable types. Yeah. Well, Henry Luce was very respectable. We're gonna get loose now.
Yay! I was wondering if you were gonna.
I was trying not to.
His name.
I was trying not to because there was an article about his wife that's called that. And
okay.
So it's a cheap shot.
It is yeah. I stole a joke from some 1940s Vanity Fair writer or something. No. I don't feel good about that. Henry isn't the only Luce that needs a good treatment, though, on Tenepod. His wife, Clara Luce, is really, really interesting as well. I'll touch on why at the end of Henry's story, but for all of the Clara fans out there, I want you to know that I hear you, and I think I would like to do an episode on her someday. But the focus this time is on Arc 5's New Henry, and we're pretty late in the ep now, so we're not going to do a whole biopic.
I always said biopic.
Biopic.
Biopic just sounded wrong to me. Every other
biopic.
It's a biopic. It's a biograph.
I feel more confident saying biopic. I feel like if I say that, people are like, "Oh, he must know." You know, it's a choice you make.
The same tricks as Child does.
Exactly right. Yeah. Biopic.
This biopic.
Yeah, don't you feel more confident?
Henry.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I certainly trust you more.
I do too.
Talk like that.
Yeah, you should talk like that all the time.
Henry. It's very important to understand.
Thinking about 1940s Guy Boris from the RPG.
Oh yeah. Oh geez.
Yes.
Then late in the RPG.
Yes. So Henry Robinson Luce was born in what century? Let me hear it.
The
19th century.
That's right. I made Arc 5 start in the 19th century and no one can stop us now.
Yes.
It's done.
Okay, these people are born in the 19th
Yeah, it was like 1898.
Okay.
I mean, barely fits in there. But I still think it counts. So, interestingly, Henry was born in China to American Presbyterian missionary parents who, which is about it. I mean, like, these are also people, this is also like a direct line to original like Puritanism. Like this is as close to modern Puritans as you have, you know, these guys. So his biographer, who's awesome, by the way, this guy Swanberg, about his book, it's a big book on Henry Luce. I'd love to finish it someday. But Henry Luce apologists have to use this guy's bio. There's no better work than this guy's work on it. And he was a socialist who fucking hated his guts. So it's a really pretty good book.
Nice.
And his the defenders of Henry Luce, of which there are many, say that this book is a complete hatchet job and 99% true, which is, I think, a pretty good compliment. You know. So 19th century, born in China. Okay. So his biographer says that like when he grew up, he learned from his parents to maintain a kind of a cold distance with the masses of the Chinese faithful, or, you know, the people they were trying to convert. And the job of his family was to, as he was explained, was to lead them to the light, not to make friends with them. You know, like our job is to direct these people, not to like touch them. So he moves to the States at the age of 15 and eventually starts studying law at Yale, becoming, like every good WASP, a skull and bonesman. there.
Nice.
Of course. So today, Yale offers the position of the Henry R. Luce Director at the Macmillan Center, if it gives you a hint of how that all went for him.
Nice.
He graduates from Yale in 1920 at the time of this, quote, like new economic era that was being declared by business people of the age. They were overcome with excitement about the scientific management of capitalist society, and welfare capitalism, kind of solving society's contradictions in capitalism. So from my reading, Luce would take from this period sort of the idea of an enlightened management, but completely depart from all that welfare shit, go quite hard the opposite direction. The modern age wasn't like a rosy and optimistic place for Henry. So during his little law, he did like a little law shit here and there. But Luce decided that I think he'd rather be rich. So he founds Time magazine with his partner, who was not long for this world, Britton Haddon, when Luce was 24. And this happens in 1923. So Luce is a young man starting his first magazine. Henry was interested in Mussolini pretty early, as was his magazine. So when Time began to turn a profit in 1927, Luce grabs his family and takes a trip out to see what this newly announced like corporate state looked like. And despite his wife at the time finding a copy of Time magazine in their hotel in Corsica, because he was going on like a Napoleon tour, Mussolini still hadn't heard of the young publisher and snubbed requests to meet him. Nevertheless, Henry Luce returned to America, and he was very inspired and announced that he wants to be now a tycoon. He says, I want to be a tycoon. And he begins buying up arable land in New York to make like his next big empire. But I don't know what happens to all that. He sticks with publishing. A year later, Luce authors an editorial for the mainstream paper Saturday Review of Literature, in which he declares that
the system of government as set forth in the Constitution is fundamentally unsuited to modern America.
So these are the anti-Constitution patriots.
Well, he believed the Constitution's time is up. Yeah. He's the patriot that believed the Constitution is up. Yeah. This did not inspire a lot of ire from his class colleagues either. Like, he didn't get a whole lot of criticism about this as far as I saw. But both Luce and Mussolini were becoming, we can call them Mussolini, were becoming a very special object of enmity by the U.S. labor movement. Like, Luce was hated by, workers. Luce's paper was run with an infamously cruel discipline, and he took away his authors' bylines. Like, they didn't have their names in the paper because of his understanding of corporatism, like overtly. He said so,
and this is Time magazine?
Tutto nello Time Incorporated. Niente al fuori di Time Incorporated.
Yeah.
He would say, I imagine. Later, employees would admit in their own memoirs and interviews and recollections that they often dreamed of murdering Luce, after which their fellow employees would throw off their shackles and race out of the building.
All right, so those are the guys that are like, we're racing out to do the bang tails and we're going to kill Luce.
Yes.
Draw and quarter, and I'll put a couple C's down on that. What do you say?
Don't let him nod. What was that crazy word you learned for a bip? For offing someone? It was like bipping them.
Yeah, there was something like that.
Don't let him dip his bill or he'll bip his boss.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the opening dream sequence of the movie Brazil, if you remember it, when it becomes a pirate ship and they're all liberated. It's a lot like that. So in 1930, Luce launches Fortune magazine, and he charges $10 a year for the subscription, which is about $100 a year today, opening up an office in the Chrysler Building in Manhattan. And there is, I think, some poetic harmony in Luce taking on like an Art Deco icon as his office, because I hate Art Deco. I hate it. It's tacky. Fortune is full of tacky Art Deco ads from rich people for other rich people to peruse. Like the first issue, I found it and I was flipping through it, and the first 52 pages are ads from rich people to other rich people. That year, Luce made a fancy person speech at a fancy person place.
Have you ever watched like CNN International?
Yeah,
all the commercials are like, invest in Gambia or something.
Exactly.
It's like clearly meant for people like sitting at the airport being like, I should invest.
You know what, darling? I think
Macedonia seems like a great place to invest.
Yes. So Luce made his fancy person speech.
The aristocratic principle may be recreated in America through what has always marched under the nicely middle-class name of business. There must be a top, and if possible, the best men must get there. A nation without aristocracy is a nation all belly and no head.
Nice.
Thought you'd like that one.
So he wants to be an aristocrat now? What's going on?
Yes. This is the question, right? Because aristocracy is such an important part of what we learned about fascism, but it's hard to make an aristocracy in a country that prides itself on not having one. So
and
what
also,
do you do?
aristocracy, they're not businessmen.
Not yet. This is where this starts.
Aristocracy would hate businessmen.
This is the beginning of a whole different aristocracy. So a historian,
the non-aristocracy.
The most completely fake of all the fake ones, which are all fake. Yeah.
I mean, they're all fake, but they're all like
have some sort of line.
Not businessmen.
They were also not businessmen. They were investors.
They're not about work.
Ah, yes, that's the trick. You'll see. Oh, I'm so excited for you to hear this. Okay, so Michael Augsburger wrote in a scholarly article about Luce for American Studies in like 2002 or something that Luce saw business as the equivalent to a battlefield, like not just metaphorically, but that it did a similar function in that it had an ability to select the natural aristocracy that Jefferson would talk about, for instance, from the masses. So it was an answer to the question that all fascists asked, which was how is this modern aristocrat who may not be of traditional noble blood, like where do we get the nobility from? Mm-hmm. Some of them found it in Aryanism, like just that kind of shit. So, but he's not that. He's not on that train exactly. He's not on that train either, but he said that, okay, so for instance, like we talked a little bit about conservative revolutionaries, right? Mm-hmm. And the conservative revolution and its attachment to war, exactly making or lifting up the natural aristocracy, the true nobles, from a system in which true nobility has collapsed, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is that same shit. But Luce is not as enthusiastic about war so much, at least not yet. He is writing. Okay, he's like nervous about violence, like a lot of these rich people were. So he wrote against lynching, for instance, but kind of also didn't. Like he wrote against lynching about how terrible and brutal and nasty it was, but then basically you would just read like the account of the lynchers for why they did it, and they would just print it as though that's what happened. So it would be like, oh, I hate lynching, but I just hope all these Negroes stop,
The problem wasn't the
grabbing
lynching; it's that the state didn't do it, or
it was unclean. It's unclean. It's messy.
No, it's too vigilante. It's
exactly. Oh, exactly. Yeah, these guys are not for vigilantism at all. There needs to be order.
Yeah.
So in
but I was thinking about this, like kind of essentially like what in the ancient regime would be middle class. Now they're the ruling class, but like bourgeois people thinking about aristocracy.
Yes.
And how much they are off. I was thinking about I watched the show The Crown a little bit. And there is a funny scene there when Margaret Thatcher becomes the prime minister, and then she goes to visit the royal family at their like Balmoral castle, which is their favorite castle. And like they hate each other. Like she would think, she expects so much of the queen and the royals and idolizes them and so on. And ends up kind of hating them, and they hate her absolutely. Like they don't want her there. And the difference between them, is like Margaret Thatcher is so boring for them. She talks about work and discipline and so on. Yes. And she's a like she dresses properly, behaves properly.
Yes.
And they're very. Like they are very like outdoors people. They wear like muddy boots. They go hunting. They dress informally. They're rude people. They curse. They like they don't behave like bourgeois people do.
Yeah,
they are all about fun and not work, and like because they are a fucking royal family. Like why would they be like that?
Yeah.
And
but what's interesting is that this also mirrors what would later happen to guys like Trump when this new aristocracy rose in America. Yeah. These guys now won't talk to guys like Trump because he's too boorish. And even though he moved into fucking Mar-a-Lago, he dines in a room that was originally called the Mussolini dining room.
Yeah, but I think that Trump actually is more of an aristocrat in his life ideas than these people, the traditional kind of WASP people are, because they're uptight, people, and like the aristocrats were not. They were like
Luce wasn't either,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
We'll get there. Their discipline is not for them.
Yeah.
Like Luce doesn't have a problem declaring masses equal to each other. He doesn't have a problem with that. He doesn't care who counts among the public. He even he supports enfranchisement for black people, women. He feared women most of all. But was like pretty okay with them occupying positions in public life because simply the masses do not matter to him. Like let them have democracy while they still want it for however long that's going to be. It doesn't mean anything to those who know, like, who know where the people that Luce believed were the true leaders of America, who know where they sit, right? Who know what's going on. So those on the inside don't need to worry about these masses too much. And when we do, we need to do it kind of scientifically and thoughtfully. So Luce distinguished like these new aristocrats who survive the fires of business. He distinguishes them from just business people or rich people, right? Like not all capitalists can do this. The business aristocracy is not interested in money. They don't talk about money. They're not greedy. They don't pinch pennies. They don't push labor for profit. They push labor for the love of the game. Like they're players, you know. They like the business aristocrat stood above materialism, which was a communist problem, right? Communists are talking about money and distribution. We don't talk about that. We don't even believe there is class struggle. Like socialists made that shit up. Luce even believed that like the problem with the stock market crash was that we gave it over to these materialistic businessmen to run that are just concerned with profit and don't have the noble spirit.
Yeah.
You know, they don't understand their role. So Luce even believed that business leaders should have their own mass fan clubs like sports stars would, and they should be cheered on by masses who were educated enough about the rules of the game to know who was winning it. And so this isn't something we would even really have until like Trump, basically, or guys like Ford or Elon Musk. I mean, we've had the celebrity cult, but like if we recall from the old Ford episodes, Ford was kind of hated in his own time. It took a little bit for him to become like the superstar celebrity beloved maker of America, you know?
But he was like, he didn't have any kind of charm, no?
He was horrible.
Yeah.
He was a terrible person and everyone thought he was weird.
Trump is a horrible person, but he's like also kind of a comedian.
He's a comedian. Yeah. So far more threatening to Luce than greedy businessmen, though, were the dual forces of chaos, women, women and labor. So one argument that I found very interesting regarding this historical moment is that advertising as a science was like got a big a big step up, a big hand up from Luce and other Luceites to rationalize specifically the fickle and chaotic desires of women, who the big boys felt were holding back things like the garment industry from fully realizing itself on truly massive scales of Fordist style production. So Luce speaks about women in a way that to me really recalled Evola and his writings of like the Catonic kind of threat that is simultaneously linked to communism and the randomness of femininity and the chaos. Very much how Luce talks about women. Claire Luce, his eventual wife, his second wife, recalls demanding that Henry Luce create a free daycare system for his research workers at Time magazine. And he refused, she claims, and this is her quote, due to his attitudes about women. So this is really clear. He was arguably kinder to labor even in certain ways. That's not even true, actually. I should say that he had kinder things to say about organized labor than he had about women in general.
Well, this is probably a kind of a deep misogyny because he's a psycho.
There's definitely that, but there's also some even trickier shit going on. Luce and people like Luce generally, so that business class at this point was fairly kind to certain kinds of union activity because they believed that unions aided in the creation of oligarchies. So they thought that unions shut down smaller competitors and allowed them to centralize capital from all the businesses that they thought unions were going to shut down. But he warned them, like, listen, we need organized labor for that purpose, but we can never let them go off the leash. Never let them become the, quote, burlesque tyrant that would rise to depose them all.
Well, interesting choice of words there, too, yeah.
I mean, if you have, like, organized workers, but who are, like, friendly with the bosses and want to work with them and see themselves as part of the same kind of larger body with the bosses. That's very close to the fascist ideal.
Well, yes, it is. Yeah. Yes, it is. So, so just to like summarize that bit real quick, we got this pilgrim who wants to create a new aristocracy from the ashes of the war of the market, dreads the destructive powers of women and labor on that vision. And he also very much believed that this mission was suffused with the same spiritual purpose that his parents had when they were proselytizing in China. He saw it as something of an extension of his own missionary background. And despite taking isolationist positions when he was into fascism, he did come around to interventionism. And he did so with quite a vengeance, and a vengeance that really had a huge effect on the American self-image. And we'll see that really, really soon here. So, but for now, the point being that Luce and Moose clearly had more than a few common interests.
Yeah.
You know, so the affection culminates in a full cover story about a full cover issue, I should say. The entire issue is dedicated to this in Fortune about the Italian corporate state, and this is in 34. It opens with a note to readers that they shouldn't see Fortune writers and their editors as fascists, since none of them are entirely fascist, though notes that most of them are a little fascist. That's what he says. The paper fawns over Mussolini and casts a glowing light on fascist corporatism, with all the usual asterisks about America and democracy and yada yada whenever it was appropriate. And despite this, Luce asks readers to unburden themselves from the assumptions that liberal democracy is the highest politic for Americans, to imagine that alternatives might soon arise that obviate our old democratic and Republican pretensions for something new. And this is all in this corporate state issue. Celebrating Mussolini's tamping down of labor, Fortune wrote that Americans must recognize 5 ancient virtues that fascism has resuscitated: discipline, duty, sacrifice, glory, and courage. The first 3, Luce believed, were for the masses, and the last 2, glory and courage, the charge of the new national elites tested in the fires of American capitalism, right? So at this talk in Scranton, Pennsylvania, that same year, he predicted this.
The more you examine Italian fascism, the more you will feel that it is not so much a system as it is a moral force. The moral force of fascism may be the inspiration for the next general march of mankind.
About being a little bit fascist, it reminded me of like a cult Yugoslav or like Bosnian sketch show, which I guess how do you translate this?
Nadrealisti?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So
top of the chart of the surrealist or something like that.
Yeah.
So there is a sketch show when I guess it's a kind of a TV news crew or something like that go to a factory, and then they ask something about some water there. And they ask, like, is this water radioactive? And they say, this water is not radioactive. This water is a little bit radioactive.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So despite initially seeing FDR as a potential ally in his quest for American corporatism, Luce turns hard against him, eventually supporting an interventionist opposition to Roosevelt during Roosevelt's interventionist period. You understand what I'm saying? Like he'd be still stuck to the interventionist line, but tried to get Roosevelt out, hated Roosevelt deeply at the end of this. So whereas initially Roosevelt was like the next Mussolini, now he's a fucking commie. You know, so likewise, Luce would eventually join the chorus of voices at the end of the 1930s, turning against their former friends, Benito and Adolf, adopting the old fascist our communist song that we all know the lyrics to now. They began calling fascism state socialism. And finally, in February of 1941, less than a year before the attack at Pearl Harbor, bringing the U.S. into the war, Luce published an essay that I'm wondering if you know, called The American Century.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Required reading in like college for sure. I think I read it in high school as well.
Atomwaffen.
So the American Century, but probably most well known by my generation for the Project for a New American Century.
Yeah,
this was the inspiration that PNAC used to do their neoliberal call. So Luce wrote The American Century, a call for America to create a kind of Pax Americana and inaugurate a noble era of democracy and freedom, and most importantly, business. And in fact, our boy at that time, he'd been like kind of fetishizing business as war. Now he's imagining what he calls the next proconsuls rising from businessmen during World War II. right? Now he's got his actual war to create the heroic aristocracy from the business class. So that's as far as I wanted to get with Luce. But there's a not so surprising twist to this story that Claire will pick up in her own tale sometime down the line. But it might not surprise you to learn that Henry Luce was very, very deep in bed with the CIA. So the Luces were close personal friends of our boy, for instance, Angleton. And Henry was on like every fasci board of every oppressed nations type shit since all of that began.
They are bonesmen after all.
They're fucking bonesmen. He chaired a number of councils that are today known due to declassification as CIA fronts, like the National Committee for a Free Europe, formed by Alan Dulles. He was a big backer, of course, of Radio Free Europe. He worked with Alan Dulles in the Fight for Freedom circles and the British Security Coordination Group, the group that basically taught the U.S. how to COINTEL people, you know? COINTEL, counterintelligence. He hired Wild Bill Donovan as his deputy director at Time magazine. His vice president, C.D. Jackson, was deputy chief of the Psychological Warfare Division of the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force and the editor of Fortune magazine, both. You know,
I mean,
he later became the publisher of Life magazine, which is, one of the popular magazines. Fortune's for rich people, Life is for the people, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something?
It's very much CIA.
Very much CIA.
Like,
yes.
You cannot be more CIA than it is.
Well, you can have this happen. Ian Fleming, James Bond, himself recommended to the British Security Coordination Council that they should have Luce run the entire propaganda arm of American British intelligence there. And then during World War II, Luce's propaganda had a readership of 20 million people weekly who read Luce's arguments against containment and for missionary intervention to stop global communism, even before John Foster Dulles started ringing that same bell. Like Luce was even there before John Foster was there. So this was a very good relationship that continued even after the war. And as late as 1952, a private directors meeting of the CIA with Dulles, Frank Wisner, and some other OGs shows Dulles asking to release classified information to Henry Luce for his own personal edification, and everybody's totally fine with that, which, okay, fine, except that information is still classified to this day.
Damn.
And it's still what they asked for, and the topic of it is still redacted now. But they were like, my boy Henry wants this, and they were all like, yeah, of course, Henry, give it to Henry. Very tight friends. So a lot of that may have come from him just being a patriotic Americanist and rich, right? I mean, that's the circles. But it didn't hurt him that he and his old buddy Alan Dulles were both like Presbyterian fucking Mayflower motherfuckers. But what really ties Luce's name, I think, most strongly to the CIA and counterintelligence is his second wife, Clara, who he married in 1935. So Henry dumped his old wife and kids for Clara, and they had a few polyamorous years of marital bliss until Clara's daughter from her previous marriage died. Clara converted to Catholicism through none other than Bishop Fulton Sheen, the ultra-right anti-communist like inspiration for guys like Coughlin, personally trained Clara Luce on how to be a Catholic. So Clara is very, very interesting, and it's unfair to squeeze her into the end like this. I'm going to do that anyway. Just going to tell a paragraph about her, but I want to just like say that I would like to do a longer episode about her because she's interesting. So just a quick rundown and that's it. So Clara was weirdly the original Equal Rights Amendment supporter in 1917 when she was very, very young. She became an understudy for Mary Pickford, Boris's favorite, on Broadway. She married up, divorced, and then sneaks in a job at Vanity Fair basically by sitting at an empty desk that some dude had left for vacation on. And she worked there for 2 weeks, and then they started paying her, and then she got the job, and then later kind of was the managing editor there. She marries Henry after this and writes the play The Woman, who was made into a hit film in the 40s, and then again a hit film in the 2000s. And I kind of want to watch it, but it sounds pretty bad. It's mostly about women hating other women and basically trying to like fuck each other over constantly. And when people ask her what it's about, she says it's about men. I don't know. But she campaigns for Dwight D. Eisenhower, and through this campaign gets appointed as the first woman ambassador, I believe, but definitely to Rome in 1953. So that's a fun time to be there.
Yeah.
So this is so when she's there, she gets really tight with Ratline Pope Pius XII, becomes very close friends with fellow Catholic James Jesus Angleton, and then there's a big blank spot there where the next episode about her will have to be. But then when she after her husband's death in the 60s, Clara is still around in intelligence circles, and she's leading things like the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. And then later, when that thing is destroyed because of the unpopularity of the CIA in like the 70s and stuff like that, for obvious reasons, she resurrects it by convincing Reagan to resurrect it, and becomes the head of this for Ronald Reagan on the what is it called, the National Security Council, which is still around. Right?
Yeah, of course.
So that was dead, and then she revives it through Reagan. And then when George Bush became director of the CIA, Clara pushed the president to tell Bush to basically recreate X2, like recreate Angleton's programs. She said, like, you guys really need to read about Angleton. James had a lot of really great ideas. He can teach people. The new generation needs to know how to do counterintelligence. And she pushed that shit, you know? Like, this is like 1950 CIA stuff. We're talking like MK Ultra, Gladio. She gets there the day Gladio starts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, she gets there, and then we got Gladio, which is why I thought this last clip was particularly funny. Not just because it's from a show called Longines Chronometer. Or Chronoscope. That's what it is. Longines Chronoscope. This is a very short clip. It's a show dedicated very much like Fortune, but in TV form. It's about like rich businessy politic types asking things that help other rich businessmen make decisions. So here is their question. She is ambassador to Italy at this point, and they have a question that knowing that she and Angleton worked on Gladio together, I think she gave a pretty fun answer.
Ms. Ambassador, to what do you attribute the diminution of communist influence inside Italy, and how strong is it there still anyway?
It's fascism.
Well, I attribute such diminution as there has been largely to the common sense of the Italian people.
Not Gladio.
They're a very wise people, and they are beginning to see that communism really doesn't pay and doesn't produce the things that they expected, many of them, of it. That is one of the main reasons. Also, the government has taken some very vigorous action against the communists in the last year.
Such as?
Well, they have dispossessed the communists from the former government-owned fascist properties, communist unions and many communist organizations. They have moved in to clear communists out of sensitive places all through the government. They've done a good many things of that sort. They're invoking for the first time very strong libel laws against the communists for libel in the press.
Mrs. Luce, would you say that communism is actually still Italy's biggest problem?
Oh, there's no question but what this encroaching form of totalitarianism is the major political problem.
How do you account for the fact that communism seems to have grown in the agricultural areas, more backward areas in Sicily?
Well, that's a bit of a paradox, you know.
Yes.
Wow, her manner of speaking is...
Right? Yes. Yeah, well, she, I mean, she was like a Broadway understudy. Like, she was a looker. Yeah. But she's also very regal.
Yes.
But her family history is not like Luce's. Like, I think she had a middle class family history. But ends up talking like these guys.
I think we mentioned earlier, maybe it was off mic, is that a lot of these people adopt this kind of accent
from the movies and stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. Etc. So that's mostly it. Like, one of the weird after things about Claire is that she also was part of the original 1960s movement for the ERA, for the Equal Rights Amendment, and claimed on William F. Buckley's show that if you are a Christian, you must necessarily be a feminist.
If you are a Christian, you must necessarily be a feminist.
Well, you know, very important, like early British feminists, a few of them became important members of the British Union of Fascists.
Yeah, it's interesting.
There is a whole book about that.
Well, that's on our British arc, which is definitely going to happen at some point. I mean, like, these guys are practically British.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
There's very little difference. I mean, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing with this arc, and especially with when you were talking about people on this level, Because it's one thing when we're talking about David Lane
Right.
or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
It's like, well, then, he was publishing from prison. No, this is like, has a long, Luce has this whole career, founds major news outlets that are, possibly some of the most important ones in 20th century US history.
Luce had these like big press outlets, but don't forget also Hearst, which was just like Luce.
Right.
He had the most press outlets. So between like the most read press outlets and literally the most press outlets, it was all Mussolini.
Yeah.
Right. But then you get her and you're like, Jesus Christ. She's in Italy with fucking Angleton. And this is
Yes, she's there gladioing people. And they're like, what's happened to the communists in Italy? Well, it's
the wisdom of Italian people.
They're very smart people. Yeah. The communists are very popular in the South. It's quite a paradox. Because I just said that they don't like them and they're getting more popular.
Yeah.
Well, we've dispossessed them of all old fascist properties that they stole from the fascists.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who got them legal.
Yes. Yeah. So that's our first kind of new material, I guess, of Arc 5. That's how I wanted to set the pace for the beginning here.
Yikes.
Yeah. There's a couple more guys I want to talk about moving forward that are still in this sort of era, but I think next time we're talking about the Colombians.
Yes,
and
Colombians, yeah.
And I think after that, I'm going to return to some of this.
Colombians are a group of fascists.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Not in Colombia.
No, in the U.S.
More of a District of Columbia kind of thing.
I'm not sure exactly yet.
But they liked Columbus.
Probably. I still didn't really go into it.
Well,
they'll cut that part off. Yeah. He knows everything about it.
But more about them on the free app.
Yes.
All right. Any last comments? I know we're running short on time here. Americanism. I think it's all here in some way.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that maybe I like about Luce in this context of this conversation is that he definitely has that kind of racial democracy mindset, but I think it's definitely more of like an elite democracy,
Mm-hmm.
Like
I think that's how they always talk about democracy.
But it moves between like race or gender or class pretty easily. So at some point they're going to centralize one over the other. And in this case, it was definitely, I think, kind of all of them. But for him, it was just the whole mass.
Well, he had a nice long career. I mean, he had the time.
He did have the time.
Yeah. Go between all these things.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, now we're getting into it.
We're getting into it.
Cocaine.
Yeah. And we'll continue next week.
That's right. Yeah. All right. And I made a little present for Boris. I just wanted to give it to him now. Ooh. If that's okay. It's apropos nothing in the episode. I just wanted you to know that we have this now. This is for you, man.
Oh, it's quite long.
It is. That's just that one part. Yeah. I just want you to know it's there.
Oh, wow. Yeah. We're going to have fun with the soundboard. Jesus Christ.
All right, guys. See you later.
Bye.
E quei briganti neri m'hanno arrestato. In una cella scura m'han portato. Mamma, non devi piangere per la mia triste sorte, piuttosto di parlare vado alla morte. Mamma, non devi piangere per la mia triste sorte, piuttosto di parlare vado alla morte. E quando mi portarono alla tortura, legandomi le mani alla catena, legate pure forte le mani alla catena, piuttosto di parlare torno in galera. Legate pure forte le mani mani alla catena, piuttosto di parlare, torno in galera. E quando mi portarono al tribunale, dicendo se conosco il mio pugnale, sì, sì che lo conosco, ha il manico rotondo, nel cuore dei fascisti lo gettai a fondo. Sì, sì che lo conosco, ha il manico rotondo, nel cuore dei fascisti lo gettai a fondo. E quando l'esecuzione fu preparata, fucili e mitraglie eran puntate, non si sentiva i colpi di mitraglia, ma si sentiva un grido, viva l'Italia. Non si sentiva i colpi di mitraglia, ma si sentiva un grido, viva l'Italia.